our attention to the education system. What truly defines a good education system? Our sources emphasize several, foundational characteristics. It starts with the absolute necessity of a well-designed curriculum, but beyond what is taught, it's also about where and how. And that leads us to the crucial need for a safe and secured learning environment, something our sources regretfully highlight is often lacking. They cite alarming instances of assault and violence, even on school transport. That's quite worrying. There's also a perceived lack of emphasis on values and ethics today, and crucially, we need well-trained and motivated teachers. Our sources lament that teaching isn't always seen as a lucrative profession, especially in the private sector, and that can really impact motivation and attracting the best talent. Finally, the physical infrastructure. It often falls short. We're talking basic necessities like safe drinking water, proper libraries, labs, even computer labs and smart boards. There are even instances highlighted of hybrid learning mechanisms where multiple grades are taught in a single overcrowded room, or teachers simply being disengaged, like that anecdote of children sifting grains in a government school while the teacher just sat idly by. It really points to a systemic challenge, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And building on that, let's narrow our focus for a moment to early childhood care and education, or ECCE. This broadly covers that critical age group of 0 to 6 years, often segmented into 0 to 3 and 3 to 6. And it integrates with the first stage of primary school from 6 to 8 years. ECCE includes formal centers like nurseries, kindergartens, and government-run Anganwadis in India, for example. Its importance is, well, it's difficult to overstate. Our sources highlight that an astonishing 90% of a child's brain develops in the first 5 years. That makes ECCE absolutely crucial for overall child development. It significantly improves learning outcomes, especially for first-generation schoolgoers, bridging that early learning gap. And it strengthens foundational literacy and numeracy, which is vital for achieving national educational goals and those broader sustainable development goals.
Wow, 90% in the first 5 years. Given that profound impact, it's truly striking the array of significant challenges ECCE faces. For instance, the funding is shockingly inadequate, only 0.1% of GDP allocated to it. Beyond money, there's a pervasive lack of age-appropriate educational and play material. Issues abound with teacher qualification, appointment, even their pay, often leading to a lack of proper training. Monitoring and supervision mechanisms, often absent or unclear, and childcare support systems are frequently overburdened. Our sources cite an instance of just one worker for 22 children under India's Saksham Anganwadi program. What's also glaring is the persistent lack of coordinated effort or convergence between different ministries involved, like women and child development, education, health and family welfare. It's a complex, multifaceted problem, isn't it?
It certainly is complex, and this raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider. How can we improve ECCE? Our sources point to several key solutions. Firstly, there's an urgent need for expansion and strengthening of ECCE facilities across all districts. That seems foundational. Recognizing ECCE as a statutory obligation, ideally under the Ministry of Women and Child Development, is another crucial step mentioned. Pedagogy, the way we teach, needs to be fundamentally reoriented. It should be child-led, not teacher-led, focusing on engaging children through play and experiential learning. We also need to mobilize corporate social responsibility, where CSR funds that money companies are mandated to spend on social good to expand both the quality and coverage of childcare. Lastly, sensitizing parents and fostering community participation are essential. Families need to understand the long-term value of early education. And maybe incentivizing teacher performance by linking it to learning outcomes could truly motivate educators to ensure those basic learning milestones are met.
Okay, moving beyond early childhood now, let's talk about the broader school education system and its core problems. Our sources highlight persistent issues like corporal punishment, which is shocking and pervasive rote learning, plus an excessive emphasis on marks. This creates an overly academic-oriented, one-size-fits-all approach that often misses the mark for many students. Teaching needs to be genuinely engaging. It should embrace child-led and experiential learning. Imagine taking children to nearby farms to learn about farm animals instead of just reading about them in a book. Sadly, as our sources note, such opportunities are not widely available. And beyond traditional academics, there's a significant gap in inculcating things like emotional intelligence, value-based education, and critical thinking. Our sources note that questioning is often discouraged. Sometimes students are even made to stand outside the class just for asking questions. Can you believe that? Structural issues also persist, like language barriers, where a lack of higher education options in regional languages can create a real disconnect for students later on. And there's this watertight compartmentalization of courses, limiting students' choices and broad interdisciplinary learning. It seems to discourage curiosity and holistic growth, doesn't it?
It really does. And the system places a significant, sometimes unseen burden on teachers too. Our sources indicate that teachers often spend only about, say, 90% of their designated teaching hours on actual instruction. They get diverted for other duties, like election duty or census work, particularly in government schools. Now, looking at the Annual Status of Education Report, or ACER, that's a key survey of learning outcomes in rural India from 2018, we see a fascinating paradox. There have been some notable improvements. Drinking water, overall infrastructure, enrollment, teacher attendance, separate functional toilets. These have all seen progress. However, this is crucial. The reading ability and arithmetic ability of Class 3 students have actually declined. That's a truly surprising fact, considering the other improvements. And there's also been a decline in the enrollment of girl children in the 15-year age bracket. Then, the COVID-19 pandemic further exacerbated these issues. Online education often meant children primarily used devices for social media, not really dedicated studies. And that negatively impacted learning outcomes. It really highlights that infrastructure alone just isn't enough.
Right, infrastructure is one piece, but not the whole puzzle. So what does this all mean for school education going forward? Our sources highlight several potential solutions, things like academic monitoring coupled with data bank review, transparent and credible systems for high-quality teacher education, that seems key, and incentivizing the private sector to perhaps invest in public school infrastructure. We also need enhanced learning through maybe one-on-one tutoring, more experiential learning, and technology-driven pedagogy. Ultimately, it seems it's about reshaping attitudes towards teaching, making it a more sought-after profession, and ensuring that any infrastructure improvements are truly effective and used well.
Let's transition now to higher education, where a unique set of challenges emerge. There's a notable missing emphasis on research and development, R&D, and issues with both the quality and quantity of colleges alongside problematic teacher-student ratios. We also see a significant brain drain, where qualitative good teachers often leave for better opportunities abroad. Our sources describe a pervasive rat race, where education is sought solely for jobs rather than for knowledge or research itself. This often leads to outdated syllabi and a significant lack of industry-academia linkage, resulting in the unemployability of many graduates. And this can cause what's known as relative deprivation. That's when educated youth expect jobs but don't get them. This leads to deep resentment that, worryingly, can sometimes drive them towards radicalization or even new forms of crime like cybercrime. Our sources also point to a pronounced lack of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary education, and a real disconnect between theoretical teaching and practical application. There's an anecdote from our sources about a post-graduation math department where, despite having multiple optional papers on offer, faculty were only available for a couple. It just demonstrates how the breadth of options is often limited by a lack of available teachers or resources.
That theoretical practical disconnect, I think many listeners can relate to that. And it brings us to the assessment system, which, as our sources highlight, creates unnecessary pressure, unhealthy competition. Thinking about the intense competition for even half a percentage point for college admissions in some places, and just significant anxiety for students. There's also a stark lack of interdisciplinary education in crucial areas like mental health, sex education, or even basic legal knowledge. Alongside an absence of adequate counseling and therapy services, the lack of transparency in grading systems also leads to major issues, favoritism, harassment, and sadly has even been linked to student suicide cases, as referenced in our sources. It really sounds like a system that prioritizes rote recall over holistic development and well-being. And when we look at social equity, it's clear that inequities persist for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities, the middle class, and that rural-urban divide in accessing higher education. Despite India having the world's third largest higher education system after the US and China, our gross enrollment ratio, or GER, that's the percentage of students enrolled in higher education. It's quite low, around 27% compared to 80% in the US and maybe 54% in China. Now, one argument presented is that this is because secondary education isn't free or compulsory in many places, leading to many dropouts before they even become eligible for higher ed. Some sources suggest focusing on an eligibility enrollment ratio instead, which might paint a different, perhaps more accurate picture. Finally, there is a significant shortage of resources. About 65% of the educational budget is utilized by central universities and institutions, and that leaves less for state universities where actually a higher number of graduates are enrolled. So there's a mismatch there too. Okay, let's delve into the privatization of education now. This feels like a truly double-edged sword, doesn't it? It kind of parallels some of the dynamics we saw in digital health regarding access versus quality. We see various forms of private sector participation. It could be contracting out specific services, like a government school hiring a private entity to build labs or libraries, or allowing completely autonomous private-run education systems. And then there are these long-term contracts involving significant private sector ownership.
Right. And from the perspective of advantages, private sector involvement can certainly offer courses with better demand in the labor market. That helps improve industry-academia linkage. They often attract and retain better quality staff and faculty, maybe due to a focus on quality and efficiency. This could lead to more accountability through things like performance-linked appraisals. The private sector also generally has a greater ability to take risks, often possessing a longer-term vision and the capacity to invest in research. Given that government spending on education is currently around 3% of GDP, well below the requisite 6%, our sources recommend private participation can significantly address this funding gap. It can also potentially prevent brain drain by providing qualitative education domestically and creating world-class institutions here. It promotes a competitive spirit, offering more opportunities for students, and it facilitates interlinking with foreign institutions through student exchange programs, online courses, certification programs, and so on. Lastly, private sectors can provide crucial financial resources like scholarships for deserving students, helping them pursue better career prospects.
That does sound incredibly promising, especially when we think about innovation and filling those resource gaps. However, our sources also highlight significant challenges and criticisms of privatization. The major problem seems to be exclusion due to high costs. This leads to an elitism of the education system, which also results in what's called the reproduction of cultural capital, meaning the values, skills, even the way of speaking prevalent in dominant social groups get continually reinforced by the system. And this often inadvertently disadvantages others, creating a cycle of elite self-recruitment. Because private education is expensive, primarily elite individuals gain access. They then often secure high-status jobs, perpetuating a cycle where the elite are continually self-recruited into powerful positions. Another concerning issue is the risk of charging more while supplying fewer or lower-quality services. That's always a danger. And if foreign or Western education models are replicated too broadly, there are concerns this could lead to a homogenization of the education system, potentially threatening traditional educational systems and values. It really seems like the very benefits can become drawbacks if not carefully managed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, it's clear that both digital health and education systems are really at a crossroads. They're demanding innovative solutions that somehow balance access, quality, and societal impact. The parallels and challenges, and maybe even potential solutions across these seemingly distinct sectors are quite undeniable when you lay it all out.
That's a truly striking observation. We've seen how similar challenges from funding gaps and accountability to quality control and equitable access, they really do plague both sectors, and how solutions often seem to involve a multi-stakeholder approach, bringing different groups together. So what does this all mean for you, our listener?
Well, this raises an important question maybe for you to consider. In a world of increasing complexity and information, what truly defines a well-educated individual today, especially when we consider the growing role of technology in both our health and our learning? And how can our systems evolve to ensure that knowledge translates into genuine empowerment and opportunity for all, not just, a select few?
That's a powerful thought to chew on long after this deep dive. Thanks for exploring these vital topics with us today.